Do you want to reinvent your career or the services that you offer as a part of your business? Then start by pivoting your professional personal brand. Grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. In today's episode, I am going to be sharing some of the key tips that I give my personal brand coaching clients who want to pivot their profession into a new direction, or maybe they want to eventually start or pivot a business that they already have into services that aren't exactly aligned with what they are currently doing, but is somewhat related. And in today's episode, I am going to be giving you my 7 tips that will help you to reinvent your career. Most personal branding experts agree that at some point of your career, or perhaps at multiple points of your career, you are likely going to have to reinvent yourself. And this reminds me of a concept that I read about in the book called Jump by Kim Perrell, where she talks about the 3 main key reasons that we make a leap from our comfort zone. The first reason is that we take a survival jump, and that is when external factors such as a job loss, or maybe going bankrupt, or maybe a life event of some kind has led to you being forced to make that particular change and to make that jump for your survival. On the other hand, there is also the opportunity jump. This is where you see an opportunity that is available and you have a vision as to where you want to go. Then there is also the stagnant jump. That is where you may be feeling a little bit bored in what you are currently doing, and maybe that you have more to offer. So think about that feeling that you might have had when you are on your way to work and you're in your commute and you're reflecting on how you feel about going to your job. Does that excite you, or do you feel like you have more to offer? This is where a stagnant jump might be the reason for you to be reinventing your career. So in this episode, you will have a step-by-step guide as to how you can reinvent your work, your profession, or the services that you offer in your business. And what you'll hopefully find is that this is not necessarily the complete scary transformation that it might seem. And it is actually about releasing the potential that you already have within you. So let's dive into my first tip. Tip number 1 is to take stock of your skills. It is easy in the day-to-day grind of your 9 to 5 to get caught up in the skills that are most important to your current employer or your current clients, instead of actually considering all of the skills that you possess more holistically, the skills that perhaps other employers might actually find valuable, or maybe your employer would find this valuable in a different area of the business, or maybe your current customers aren't actually aware that you are able to help them in this particular field. Or maybe you could pivot your business to a whole new set of clients who are interested in the skills that you have to offer in that particular area. When you are looking to pivot your profession, this is a really exciting opportunity to be able to broaden your current horizons to the new possibilities. Take, for example, if you were redoing your resume or your LinkedIn profile or your website, or you were reevaluating the services that you had to offer your current clients. You would start by doing a complete audit of your skill set, and you would consider all of the various roles that you have had in your career or the services that you have provided people in the past. And you would do a really deep dive into what those skills involved and what your proudest achievements were as a part of that. What did you most enjoy in those activities? So when you do an audit of your skills, this gives you a chance to not only focus on what you have enjoyed executing most in terms of your skill set, but also what has been of high demand in the marketplace. You might also consider the formal qualifications or the training that you have had and really take a deep dive into the skill set that they allowed you to be able to acquire. You may also consider the feedback that you have had from colleagues. What were you the go-to person for example? This gives you clues into what you are particularly skilled at. I like to think of your skills as almost like being this dormant volcano. Just because some of them aren't being completely utilized in your current work, it doesn't mean that they aren't there. Some of your best skills could be hiding in plain sight, waiting for that potential to be able to erupt when given the right conditions. Tip number 2 is to explore what you want to do in life. Sometimes it is hard enough to know what you want to do next with your personal brand, let alone what you want to do with your life. But thankfully, there is a framework that can help with that. In the book Ikigai, the authors go behind the scenes into Japanese culture, particularly in the area of Ikigai. Ikigai in Japanese culture is that reason for being. It's the reason that you want to jump out of bed in the morning. The research in the book focuses in particular on the island of Okinawa. This is where the people live the longest of anyone else in the world. It is said that of every 100,000 people, there are 25 people who are over the age of 100. So Ikigai then explores the secrets of a happy and long life. And what does that actually involve? The key element of Ikigai is to find what you love, find what the world needs, find what they will pay for, and find what you are good at. And those things at its intersection will form your Ikigai. If you apply this to your professional personal brand, this is like finding the sweet spot of the work that you would find most fulfilling that is also valuable to the marketplace. When Michelangelo would talk about creating the statue of David, he would famously comment about how David already existed within the piece of marble that he chose. And it was actually about chipping away at the marble to reveal the David statue that already existed within there. Career changes are often less about a complete transformation and more about revealing the potential that you already have within you. It's about chipping away at the excess to reveal what your niche could be, or revealing what skills you possess so that you can develop those further. And this leads nicely into tip number 3. Tip number 3 is to supercharge your knowledge and skills. In his book, A Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett talks about his 33 rules for business and life. And the first rule is to fill your buckets in the right order. So what are his buckets that he is referring to? The 5 buckets that Bartlett talks about is what you know. This is your knowledge. What you can do. This is your skills. Who you know, which is your network. What you have, which is your resources. And what the world thinks of you. So this is your reputation. The 5 buckets are interconnected, meaning that you can't pour from the empty buckets. So the investment that you put into your knowledge is what is going to be the highest yielding investment for you. So think about this, applying it to personal branding as being the highest yielding investment of your personal brand. Your applied knowledge is then what becomes your skills, and your skills cascade into the remaining bucket. The first 2 buckets, really importantly, are the things that cannot be taken away from you by what people think or any other external factors. Bartlett says, those who hoard gold have riches for a moment. Those who hoard knowledge and skills have riches for a lifetime. When you know how you want to reinvent your career, then do the research. When I first wanted to pivot my 15 years of marketing experience into more specifically the personal brand niche, I did as much research as I could. I didn't know anyone personally who was in this area, but I spoke to people who were in related fields. Those people gave me introductions to other people, and I spoke to those people as well. I read every single book that I could find on personal branding. I listened to every podcast episode that I could find. I watched all the YouTube videos that I could on the topic. For me personally, what this did was it allowed me to break free from the echo chamber of all of the people and all of the experience that I have had in my career up to that point, and to actually start to see work and your career in this new light, and to really be able to open my mind to all of the possibilities that existed beyond my current network and my current experience. Tip number 4 is to build your personal brand in private. As the saying goes, when you build in silence, they don't know what to attack. The time between when you have decided on the path that you want to forge for your career and when you actually make that known more publicly is such a beautiful space to be in. Just think about the way that major companies approach their product strategies. It is likely that they have been working on developing that particular product for at least years before you even hear about it. So during that time, they are developing that to optimize the offering that they are able to provide to the marketplace. They are getting steps ahead of the competition before the competition is even aware that it needs to catch up in this space. So you can think about applying this approach to elements of your own professional personal brand strategy. Just because you have had an idea doesn't mean you actually have to share it with everyone immediately. When I first wanted to move into personal brand coaching, I started by coaching people in private first before I actually shared that with anyone else publicly. My website wasn't live. I didn't actually publish the blogs that I had already started writing. I didn't post about my services on social media. Instead, I worked with developing my offering with the clients that I had in private. I was essentially testing and developing a minimal viable product. I was collecting testimonials, referrals, and feedback to then be able to be better positioned when I was able to then launch my business in personal brand coaching into the more public sphere. This reminds me of one of my favorite concepts, which comes from Patrick Bet-David's book, Your Next 5 Moves. And this is about thinking like a grand chess master, to constantly be strategizing in the longer term and to be thinking about those steps ahead of where you are currently at in the game, thinking ahead of the competition, for example. Tip number 5 is to plant seeds in public. Just because you are building some elements of your personal brand strategy in private doesn't mean that you can't prime your audience in public. When you know where you want to go with your professional personal brand, you can start to take little steps in that direction in your public brand. This is where you are really trying to pivot slowly instead of giving your audience what might feel like whiplash when it comes to your professional personal brand. In your personal brand story, you are connecting the narrative. You're really highlighting what those transferable skills are to your audience so that when you make that change, they go, okay, yeah, that makes so much sense. Of course, that would be the next step. So how can you prime your audience? When you know the direction that you want to take, you might start to, for example, on LinkedIn or whatever other platform you use, start to engage with particular content that relates to that sphere that you want to also be aligned with. Maybe you'll then start to share that content to your audience. You're sharing other people's content in that space. Then eventually, when you start to share your own content in that area, your audience has already been primed to understand that that is where your interest lies. So if you know where you are going with your professional personal brand in the long term, then you can start to tune in to the vibe of that area. This is something that I heard Ali Abdaal talk about when he was referring to the importance of understanding the vibe of your target customers or your target organization, because this can look really different across different industries and across different client types as well. When you know the vibe that you are trying to appeal to or that you want your personal brand to pivot into, you can start to slowly over time pivot towards that particular tone of voice. But this is actually about much more than just your tone of voice. It is about tuning in to the culture of that particular area so that your frequency can match theirs. Tip number 6 is to enter boldly. In Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, he talks about this concept of entering boldly as being one of the laws. When it is finally time for you to launch your reinvented professional personal brand, I want you to keep this in mind, because in personal branding in general, there is a lot of talk at the moment about vulnerability and authenticity. But when you go back to your Ikigai, remember that a key component of that is finding what people are willing to pay for. So if you sound insecure or you don't sound confident in that next stage that you are entering for your career, then why would anyone want to pay you for that thing? So on your website, in your resume, in any launch post that you are doing related to your new stage of your professional personal brand, then remember to sound confident. Instead of using passive language, use active language. This will increase the tone of voice to sound more confident. You want people to feel inspired to be able to engage with you, rather than feeling like you aren't actually sure if you actually possess the skills that are necessary to be able to take that next step. Think about this as being your reintroduction into your network for your professional personal brand, and remind yourself that first impressions count. Tip number 7 is to keep pushing big rocks. When you have launched your personal brand reinvention, then remind yourself to keep focusing on the big rocks in the long term. What are your big rocks? And this is something that I talk about a fair bit on this channel. It is based on the metaphor relating to placing rocks into a jar. If you are to place the small pebbles into a jar first, the smaller priorities, for example, then when you actually go to place the big rock in the jar, it won't actually necessarily fit. So you aren't able to focus on those things that are more important. But if you start by putting the big rock into the jar first, then the smaller pebbles, the more day-to-day, the smaller priorities are more easily able to fall around that big rock. What I like to do is to think about how I'm always adding big rocks to my professional personal brand strategy. Because over time, the things that felt big to begin with will then eventually feel like day-to-day activities. Remind yourself that your reinvention for your career will quickly become your day-to-day. So how are you always leveling up to that next stage of your professional personal brand? Just think about, for example, the one big rock that you can add at different points of the year. I like to include this in my own 12-week year strategy. And if you're not familiar with that, that is based on the book by Brian P. Morgan and Michael Lennington. And you can learn more about that in my previous episode on the 12-week year. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.